Today's big news in the publisher newsletter is managing and tracking newsletter advertisements in AdRotate Pro. I want to just start off by unpacking this newsletter for today. This is something that we're dedicated to. We're sending out something every week, and we're actually thinking about changing the format a little bit. I was talking about this with Terry yesterday, maybe just having more bullet points at some section in this. I don't know if that would be helpful, but just short tips, how to, kind of like a did you know section. If you think that would be helpful, I'd definitely be interested in that. What we do now is just kind of focus on one topic at a time, basically. It's one blog post a week. I think this would be more, Terry, maybe you can elaborate on what you're thinking, but it would be more facts about the industry. How would did you know differ from what we're doing today?
My inspiration came from one of our Alabama papers.
Okay.
There's a section that has just trivial stuff that's really, really interesting. You know, that it's like in the middle of the paper, so people have to go through the paper to get there. The idea was just to put in a little, did you know, kind of for fun. Did you know that so many people read their news at breakfast as opposed to their midnight snack kind of thing? Just
Right.
trivial stuff that would bring people all the way down the newsletter.
Just a little bit easier to digest than like a whole blog post on that.
Not necessarily, it doesn't have to be something educational every time. Just
Right.
little facts, little things to kind of brighten things up a little bit.
We would want to create an area in Asana where we could just constantly drop ideas. And then I think every once in a while have a did you know section that's just 4 or 5 things, one right after another. That could be cool. We'll think about the format, but yeah, I think facts like this article that we're going to highlight in Today in News Tech about podcasts emerging as a significant source of news, something like that. Some of the stats in that article.
You know, just throw some stats out there. That would be kind of fun. And I think that would tease a lot of people who are statistic minded like myself. You know, we eat up those stupid stats.
And sometimes they do kind of get buried in the article. The headline is podcast consumption up, and that may be all that the reader of the newsletter sees. But if we could just pull out those stats a little bit more, I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Put the statistics. This would be an area where we could focus on that. Today's big news in the publisher newsletter is managing and tracking newsletter advertisements in AdRotate Pro. If you run advertisements in that, do you run display ads or banner ads at all? And if you do, are you reporting stats to the advertisers? Because that's where this idea came from. Basically, the option to consolidate all your stats in one place. So let's go ahead and look at the blog post here. So the process is going to be very similar to creating an ad on the website. Basically, what you're doing is using AdRotate Pro to track your ad stats in the newsletter rather than using the newsletter statistics function, which is what we would normally tell a publisher. If they wanted to track their newsletter stats, you can create an image and you can link it to the advertiser, and then you can look at the newsletter stats. It basically puts all the clicks and opens all the activity on the newsletter in one place. But if we could get that actually in the AdRotate tool, then you would be able to just bulk export all your stats at one time. Certain publishers are really focused on this, and you know, they've probably already figured out a way to do the tracking in the newsletter stats, but I think this would just make things simpler for them. So basically, it's going to be 3 steps. You're going to first set up the advert in AdRotate Pro, just like you would for an ad on the website. If you have one advertiser that wants to be on the website and the newsletter, the best way to do it, just to keep those stats separate, would be to create 2 adverts in AdRotate Pro. One would be the newsletter advert, and one would be the website version. And anyone that's familiar with AdRotate Pro, it might be helpful for me to pull it up real quick on our Today in News Tech site. So I'll just pull this up here so we can look at this alongside the blog post. So this is where you would come to create your adverts. You see I've got 2 in here. These are both really designed for the website. I would just add a new one, put the link in there where I want it to go, create the ad code and everything. But the name, I would just want to make it newsletter specific. And then I would have those 2 adverts in here to track the same advertisement in 2 different places. First, creating the advert. And then you place it in the newsletter by first creating an image. And that's basically how, up until that point, that's the same as it was before. If you wanted to place an advertisement in the newsletter, you would just place an image and link it to the advertiser. But in this case, we're going to use a custom URL that you can create from the Ad Rotate Pro advert. And this whole section goes into creating that URL. And it's very simple. You just need to have your website URL. This is the template. Start with your website URL /ad rotate. So that's going to tell the system, and when the user clicks, it's got to follow a path to get to the advertiser's website. We're not going to just send them directly to the advertiser anymore. We're going to actually go through your site. First needs to find the URL that we're talking about. Then it needs to go into the Ad Rotate Pro plugin and then click. This is telling the system that we're going to track this click in this advert. Then you need to add the ad ID number, and that is right here. So when you create your advert, we only have these 2 ads in here. You'll probably have many more, so your numbers will be higher. Just grab that ad ID that matches the advert that is specifically uploaded for the newsletter. And then lastly, the group ID number, if it's in a group ID. If it's not, then you can just put 0. It requires a little bit of setup, but once you create that URL, then you can just keep reusing it in every newsletter. Just duplicate that newsletter each week, and that image would still be in there. So I think ideally you could set up an automated newsletter where the template has this advert at the top, and then your news stories just flow in each week automatically. So this is new to me. This was just a brand new feature that was released last week. Any questions on that?
I mean, if you want to go through just one specific, the 2 bits of code you showed, how does the code that is highlighted here, how does that interact with the code snippets that a customer would normally use when they create a new ad?
So this actually will not interact with the code snippets when they're creating the ad. When they're doing the ad creation, that's all going to be exactly the same. That's a great question. So let's just go over that quickly. And this is something Terry and Vera are teaching to customers all the time. When you're creating your ad code, you need to use one of these code examples. I'm not going to save this. This is the ad code that you're going to use on the advert in Ad Rotate Pro. This is the URL that goes to the advertiser website. Now, everything I just said is the same steps that you would follow for creating any advertisement on the website. Those are the same steps you're going to follow for newsletter ads. Only thing that's different is on the newsletter itself. This is a very good question. You're going to be, instead of putting a direct link to the advertiser's website, you're going to put this custom URL in there so that it can filter through the Ad Rotate Pro plugin. Right. So
and once I think, like you said, once you have that work pattern set, all you're really going to need to do is update the ad ID and the group ID.
Correct. If you need to change this ad 1 week, you're just changing those 2 last numbers.
Because when I used to do this, this was the code I would have to use, but I would have to like embed it in the HTML that we were just embedding for that ad. And I would do that. I would just update the ad ID to update the ad, and that's great. But having this all consolidated right in a reusable widget is fantastic. Are we going to see this on the TNT dashboard soon?
I think this is just part of all the sites after this week's update.
Fantastic.
So yeah. We could actually get some experience ourselves by creating an ad for the website and a newsletter that's going out each week. That's a great idea. We should actually do that. So right now on the TNT newsletter, I think we have an ad for audio articles, correct?
Yeah, there's just a banner at the top for that.
Okay. Could you try to set this up for this week's newsletter, and then we could have a follow-up next week?
Swap it out for a tracked ad. Sure.
Exactly. Just use this custom code for a tracked ad. And I guess technically, I don't think it needs to be the same ad graphic. You could create an image in here, and then it's linking through Ad Rotate Pro. I don't even think you would need to upload an image in Ad Rotate Pro.
I think I can just use it because it's in the media library already.
Yes, right. So you might as well. So bottom line, this is a way to track your ad stats in the newsletter in Ad Rotate Pro. So Ad Rotate Pro has really been set up to be optimized for reporting. So if I come back to manage adverts, you've got all your stats right there. You can just click in the stats. If this were a newsletter advert that I've created that custom code for, then it would be tracking all your clicks from the newsletter, and you could just email the advertiser a report or export it and format it for them. But bottom line, it just allows you to take advantage of all the features of Ad Rotate Pro for your newsletter ads.
And you can also have just a newsletter sponsor. You don't have to, they don't have to be on the website as well. If you just want to keep your newsletter sponsorship exclusive to certain advertisers, you can do that too.
Exactly. Okay, so getting back to the newsletter, just to unpack things a little bit more. Today in News Tech, we're highlighting this initiative that we have at the company where we're trying to just cover the industry and bring you news from some of the biggest news publishers and make it applicable even to the smallest weekly newspaper, some of these lessons that we're seeing unfold all over the world. And so that's what we'll be talking about in the next few minutes. But before we get to that, I just want to highlight next Thursday, the 24th at noon, we've got this great opportunity. We're going to be sitting down with two of the leading attorneys from the firms that are actually suing Google and Facebook on behalf of newspapers. It's an antitrust lawsuit. Their argument, and I've got some notes in front of me here that I'll be using during the interview. I'm trying to get them ready now, well ahead of time, because this is a big topic. But basically, as I understand it, their argument is that Google and Facebook have an illegal duopoly on local advertising. They're not just saying that Google and Facebook have come up with these great advertising products that are just stealing the market. They're actually saying that they have created an ecosystem where they control both the buy side and the fulfillment side, and that's what makes it an antitrust situation. So they control the majority of local advertising sales, which is now over 70% of local advertising going through these platforms. And they also control the majority of the inventory. So when I say that, I'm talking about Google ads that show up on search, they show up on YouTube, and then Facebook ads, which show up in your news feed. So it's a very interesting case and very close to our hearts. Obviously, we're not anti-Google. I mean, obviously, Google is doing amazing things, especially in terms of organizing the world's information, but they're just taking all the profits and not paying newspapers anything for their content. And they wouldn't really be anything without the newspaper content. That's what people are searching for. That's what shows up in search results. And then they directly monetize it with an ad right next to your content. They continue to maintain that they're not publishers, they're just platforms. It's just such a huge topic. It's impossible for me to kind of summarize it right now. So come to the webinar if you have a chance. We'll be recording it, so there'll be a version available later. We're going to talk about the case, about their progress, and if anyone's interested in getting involved as a publisher, we'll talk about how you can do that.